Take one, action. Hi guys, welcome to my landscaping tutorial. Today I'm going to be talking mostly about how to take a photograph of that. A lot of people struggle with exposure when it comes to taking landscape photographs, but if you follow a couple of basic settings and steps, you should be able to get around any kind of exposure problems that you might have. To start off with, you should start by selecting a really good scene. A lot of people don't really like kind of drab scenes, like scenes that don't have a lot in them. You want to look for interesting foregrounds, interesting midgrounds, and interesting backgrounds. It's not so much all three of those grounds have to be covered. You have to cover at least two of them with interesting features. For instance, we've got the reeds here in the foreground, and we've got a long lake that goes all the way to the foreshore there for the midground. Then you've got your background, which is relatively nice colours, but prefer the colours that you get from the lake, from the reflection that you get off of the sky. To start off with, your exposure is everything when it comes to landscape photography. You need to make sure that you neutrally expose your sky with your foreground and your middle ground. Otherwise you're going to have an issue where you go to post-production processing and you'll find that your foreground and your middle ground will be really underexposed, and you have to push the exposure in the computer in order to bring it all the way back. But that way you'll then also have to compensate for the sky. If you use a very simple tool called an ND gradient filter, it's basically this little piece of glass right here. What it is basically like sunglasses on a camera, where it will reduce the amount of light going into the lens from a darker point up the top of this filter all the way down to pretty much clear on the bottom of the filter here. And you can adjust where the middle line is on your horizon. Usually you want to get it so that that line is right on the horizon there. Alright. Also, you need to worry about focus and focal zones. When you're doing your initial setup, you need to figure out exactly what you want in focus and how you want it to look. You need to have a mind's eye of what the photograph needs to be like. I always look foreground, middle ground first before I look at the sky. If my foreground and middle ground aren't looking too good, then I look at the sky and see how much I want to put in it. The sky is kind of like your, it's kind of like an add-on. So if you're not liking what you see in your middle ground and your foreground, you add more sky, and that way you'll get a kind of more of a better looking shot. Usually I just pick up and change to a new scene, but I mean, if you haven't got that option, then you can do it that way. With something like this, I'm probably going to aim to get a kind of mirror reflection on the water. So I want to kind of neutralize all of the ripples you're seeing out in the water that all the ducks are creating. You can see all the little spots there. I want to get a lot of this reflected colour to come into the camera so I can get more colour in the lake than up in the sky. Alright, absolutely essential to have a tripod with something like this. If you're going to be using f-stops from 11 and upwards, which I talked about in the website, on the web page, then you need to make sure you have a tripod to hold the camera still. You're never going to be able to hold the camera long enough to keep it nice and steady for that shot. So a tripod is absolutely essential. Also, have a look at getting one of these. You can get them for anywhere between $35 to $70 in a normal store. It's called a remote shutter release. What it does is it allows you to remotely activate the shutter. It's so that when you're taking your photographs and you're doing long exposures, you're pushing down on the shutter. It doesn't cause it to kind of cause any kind of blurring, like residual blurring. So this is a nice handy tool, and it also keeps you from having to push up there all the time. In terms of settings for this particular scene, I like to shoot in AV a lot, because it gives me an accurate amount for my aperture that I want. So at the moment I'm on f11 and I'm getting a shutter value of 1/6 of a second, which is pretty good. it will give me a decent shutter speed. It'll give me a decent kind of blur on the water. It's not going to be perfect. I should have got here a lot earlier, but yeah. Also, if you're looking to shoot a landscape, you need to get to your spot an hour to an hour and a half early to make sure you know exactly what lighting you want, especially for the morning shots, because once the sun's up, that's it. You have to go pack up and go home. Yeah, it's all about colours in landscape photography. If you shoot during the middle of the day, you're not going to get quite what you want. The colours are more neutral than they are anything else. You don't get kind of really vibrant reds, really dramatic skies like we're getting right now. Yeah, it's not as dramatic during the midday kind of area. You want to be there sort of sunrise, sunset. And landscape photography is a patience thing. It's like fishing. You have to sit there and wait for the perfect shot or the perfect fish, if you want to use that analogy. Alright, so let's start by taking the first photograph. Now the sun's coming up, so it's pushing our shutter speed value up. Luckily, we still have 1/6 of a second going for us. And it comes out alright. I'm not getting the mirror effect I wanted, but I could probably adjust that by increasing the aperture. Let's say f16. There you go, I'm getting 1/4 of a second now. Yeah, so I mean that's more shallow. There's more mirror effect happening on the water now. You really want shutter speeds of about 1 second to about 1.5 seconds if you want to do blurring. Anything more than that kind of causes too much blur in some cases, or it's just not worth it, really. So, yeah, let's push that aperture value up a little bit more, I think. I like to shoot on f22. It's not something I shoot on a lot, but I like to shoot on it when it's required. It gives me the option to get a lot of the frame in focus, so that when I go to take the shot later on, to post-production editing later on, I don't have to worry about, oh no, that particular zone wasn't in focus and stuff like that. You do lose depth when that happens. So you don't get as much depth in your field as you do. And I talked about depth of field and stops and stuff like that in the web page as well, so have a look at that and that'll tell you about those kinds of terms and what they mean. We're getting a more dramatic sky now, which is good. Getting some nice reflections on the lake. Nice kind of half and half reflections of the sky there. It's kind of looking really, really good. What a lot of people will do during landscape photography is they'll take the photograph and during post-production editing they'll crop it down, so it's either looking almost like a panorama, either vertically or horizontal, depending on the way you shoot. You can do individually stitched panoramas, but that's only if you're doing it for very, very large printing. If you're only printing, say, A2 and lower, or A1 and lower, a single shot panorama on a 18 megapixel sensor is going to be fine. You could probably get away with an A1 print on a full frame sensor like I'm using right now, my 1DX that I'm using at the moment. So that's all fine. I forgot to mention the lens as well. Lenses are very important when you're taking your photograph. You want the widest lens possible so you can get more in the frame, but you don't want to give up on kind of aspect ratios. If you get a really, really wide lens, you're going to throw the aspect ratio right off and you're going to get curvature towards the end of the frame. It's happening a little bit in this lens that I've got here, but not to the extent where it would be a problem. Some of the cheaper wide-angle lenses you can get on the market will exaggerate that effect, so you'll be losing out on a lot of kind of frame of your frame. So you need to really have a look at the lenses you buy before you buy them. Yeah. So we're getting the sun coming up now, so we're starting to increase shutter speed now with the higher light levels. Still getting some decent enough shots. And I'm still getting my foreground in exposure as well, so you can still see the reeds. Still see the reeds in the foreground, which is good. Normally they would be underexposed and you'd have to go through all kinds of rigorous Photoshop processes to bring them back. Something like this ND graduating filter online can cost anywhere between $100 to $75 depending on where you buy it from, and then you still have to get the adapter bracket and the holding mount for the glass. I think all up will come to something like $150 for everything together, depending on where you buy it from again. It's a nice little thing to add to the kit if you're into your landscape photography. If you don't think you're going to be really into it, you can still shoot with a normal lens, but you just have to be aware that your foreground and your middle ground have to be properly exposed for the shot. So you may have to overexpose the sky to bring back the middle and foreground, and then go back through your post-production editing and edit the sky. And let me tell you, if you're doing landscape photographs and you're shooting without an ND graduating filter, it's best to overexpose the sky, because it's always easier to bring back the sky than it is to bring back the foreground and middle ground. Detail is everything. You want the best possible detail in this area than you do in the sky area. Alright, because that's where everybody's going to be looking when they look at this shot later on. Unless, of course, you're having really dramatic skies, in which case you pay more attention to the sky than you would the middle ground or the foreground. But in this particular instance, I want to focus more on this lower area. Get the ducks swimming across the water now. They're adding a little bit to the effect as well. I mean, it's little things like that that will help a lot with your after effect of the shot. Groups of ducks swimming across the water, giving up a silhouette, making it look really interesting. So they're giving off their nice bow wake behind them. So it's quite a good effect in the after effects of the shot. The colours are looking pretty good. Yeah, the colours are looking pretty good. And right now I'm shooting on f/22 at 1/4 of a second. So that's roughly what I was getting out of the f/16 value that we had at the beginning of the video, but you can see how quickly the light can change when you're shooting landscapes. So you have to be very thoroughly aware of your light and your situation. The sun's coming up now.